That was Nehemiah chapter 2. We started a few weeks ago working our way through this text to learn what an ancient book like this has to say to us today. And one thing I like about going through an Old Testament book like Nehemiah is how in the book we can see a story like Nehemiah's, and we can kind of take a step back. And when we look at the story of Nehemiah, and we look at his life and we kind of just track it like a narrative, like a story, we can then sort of pick up on some themes. We can pick up on how God works. We can pick up on, what God is doing and sort of the blueprint for how God works even through a person. And that's what I'm excited for you to see with me today as we look at Nehemiah's life, is to see how God works through Nehemiah, how he puts this burden on his heart, and then Nehemiah goes and he's starting to move this project forward at this point. We spent the first week in chapter 1 where Nehemiah receives the report from his friends, his brother, and he learns that the city of God in Jerusalem is in ruins, and worse than that, the people in ruins. They're in a desperate place. And when he receives the report, it says that he mourned and prayed and fasted for many days. He's torn apart by what he's hearing is happening there, right? And then last week, Pastor Ricky took us through the latter part of chapter 1, where he turns to God in prayer, and we have this recorded prayer of his, where he's saying to God, here's what I want from you, God. Here's my desire. And we get this really amazing, intimate look at a prayer that has driven Nehemiah one step closer to what God is calling him to do. And so that leads us here to chapter 2. And I'll tell you that I think most of us, we have things that pop up in our lives, like what is happening here with Nehemiah. And it will bother us for a minute, but that's just it. It will bother us for a minute, and we move on. It will bother us for maybe a few minutes or a few days, but then we just move on. This is a really stupid example, but I had this moment recently. One of our cars was involved in a little fender bender, and unfortunately, the car that our car was involved with was a Rivian. I don't know if any of you drive a Rivian in here, but Rivians are very expensive cars, and they're basically just a computer on wheels. All right, so our car that put this small little dent in this car, we thought, oh, well, how bad could it be, right? It can't be that bad. And we said, hey, just check out how much it's going to cost. I'm sure we'll be able to figure something out. It's barely noticeable. It can't be too much. They sent us back the quote for the damage that's done on this car, and they said, here's our quote. We didn't expect it to be this much. It's just that they have to, when they repair something like this, they have to recalibrate every sensor on the car. They have to retrain the computer, and I don't know what else. And basically, you're getting a brand new car because it was $10,000 for one small dent like that. And we were like, okay, all right, don't breathe on those cars, please. Just let's stay far away. And so in that moment, I was super frustrated. $10,000. Oh, this is killing me. I cannot believe that one small dent, it costs that much money. And so I had in my mind, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go lobby a politician, and we're going to change things. Somehow this cannot be right. We're going to get a law passed that keeps this from ever happening. I don't know how that would work, but I'm going to talk to some people. We're going to figure out how we can just fix all of this, right? And of course, 5 minutes later, I called my insurance and I never thought about it again and moved on. Because that's what happens. We get frustrated by something. We get a little up in arms about something, and that's a very stupid example. I like to use those just because I want God to kind of pick on you a little bit. I want God to sort of move in your heart a little bit to where an area, and I hope you've been thinking even since the first week, I hope you've been thinking about some place in your life where maybe God has got you a little frustrated. You feel a little discontent. You feel I can't believe that it's like that. And I call it a holy discontent, where when you look at a situation or you look at a group of people or like some, I don't know, going on in the world, and you go, it shouldn't be like that. If Jesus were here, Jesus would not be pleased. He would want this to look different. He would want to bring peace here. He would want to bring help here. He would want to bring hope here. And I don't like how it is, and I want to see something different. Now, that can be in a bigger problem or scale, but it also can be in very small things too. It can be like in your home where you see something, and you've got some holy discontent, and you're like, I want to see this different. I want to see things change. I hope, and I've been praying like God would bring some things in your heart. Again, we can look at Nehemiah's story. You can go, oh, wow, that was great. That was cool how God moved and God used Nehemiah. But like, I want this book to be so practical to you. I hope this book is so practical to you. When you look at Nehemiah's story, that you go, this could be me too. I may not be a cupbearer to the king, and I may not be going to rebuild walls, but God may be putting something in my heart about something that needs to change. That God may be working in me and producing in me like something that's awakening my heart. That's how I like to frame what happens in Nehemiah chapter 1. And I want to give you today, I want to give you this idea, this framework to use, that God works, he works in us to work through us. How does he do that? How does God work in us to work through us? And the first thing he does is God awakens us. And that's what's happening in chapter 1 with Nehemiah, that God is awakening Nehemiah to some problem in the world. There's something that has disrupted his heart. We said that when God disrupts your heart, it's meant to awaken us to something. It's meant to bring us out to, like, maybe God's doing something here that I need to pay attention to. I brought up the story of our church that, like, when we started this church, and we started having services a year and a half ago, we said we really feel strongly burdened that there needs to be a church here, right here in our community, that has some distinctives to it, that wants to be this Acts 2 type of church and who loves the gospel, wants to see the gospel preached, and wants people to encounter Jesus. We like, okay, that's our burden, and like we want to see it happen. And so God awoke us to that, and God moved us to that. So that's what I'm trying to get you to see with Nehemiah, how this happens in Nehemiah's life. First, if God's going to work in you to work through you, God's going to awake you to something. He's going to awaken your heart to something. And then second, here's what God's going to do. He's going to shake you. God's going to awake you, and God's going to shake you. We don't like this. Nobody likes to feel like shook. Is that how the kids say it? We want to like everything to be like put together and like fixed in a moment. And so like here's the idea that's happening here in chapter 2. Look at verse 1. It says, in the month of Nisan. Like, what's that? What does that matter, Joel? Well, if you look back at chapter 1, it told us what month they were in, the month of Kislev. Now we're in the month of Nisan. We're 4 months later. 4 months later, and Nehemiah has heard the news of Jerusalem, and here he is in chapter 2, right when he's about to tell the king how he's distraught. He's still distraught 4 months later. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. God has shook his heart. God has captured him in a way where he's like still upset about this. When he goes before the king, and the king is like, why is your face sad? Can I do a literal translation of those words right there? Here's the literal translation. Why does your face look so bad? That's what it means. Okay, can you imagine like going up and like showing up at work and somebody's just like, why your face looking so bad? What's up? That's what the king does when Nehemiah shows up at work and his face is sad, and that's not a good thing because he's serving the king, and the servants of the king kind of have to have their act together. They don't want to disrupt anything. They don't want to like cause disturbance to the king. And here's Nehemiah, and his face is looking sad. And the king notices. Somehow, some way, like Nehemiah like has always been a good servant to the king, and at this point, Nehemiah, when the king sees Nehemiah's face, he knows something is wrong. And that's what I'm trying to say is like God will shake you that to where it may be a few weeks later or a few months later, you're still going to be feeling it when he kind of awakens your heart to some issue, some problem, something he wants you to go after. Not like me in my car and when I had that brief moment and I was thinking I was going to fix something and never did, right? Nothing like that. It's like it sticks with us. God will shake you in a way where you can't lose it. In fact, I would say that one of the ways we can know that God's working in our hearts is that we can't get rid of it. So many times when God works in our hearts, it's like, okay, I'm going to try my best to move on from this, and God won't let you. And that's a way that I've been able to measure at times that God. This is from God. This is something that I can't get off my heart. It lingers. It won't go away. And when those things linger in our heart, they often launch us out to his mission. So here's what I would like for you to kind of hear from me if you hear nothing else today. Here's kind of the main point. If you think about this, of God shaking us, there's a reason for that. It's meant to move us. When God shakes us, it's meant to move us. Right? Nehemiah is not meant to sit on this. Nehemiah is not meant to just say, I feel bad, I'm going to just pray. Now, it's never just praying, right? Praying has purpose. Praying has so opened the door so many times to God moving, and God participates in our prayer. But listen, we have to many times go beyond praying and act. We have to pray and participate. So when God shakes us, it's meant to move us. When God moves us, and here's what's going to often happen. If you just look at Nehemiah's story, I want to kind of show you a few things of how God will have to move us. If you're like Nehemiah, and you're gonna like go after something. Here's point A under this idea of God moving us. That God will often have to move us through our fear. Did you notice how Nehemiah was very much afraid in verse 2, the latter part of verse 2? He said, then I was very much afraid. So why is he afraid? You got to ask yourself, why is he afraid here? Well, I'm sure him being upset in the presence of the king, Nehemiah is going, well, this could go badly. If the king doesn't like me, and for being sad, he could cast me out and do whatever he wanted to. So I'm sure he was a little bit fearful on that level. But on another level, you can go back to Ezra chapter 4. So I think I mentioned this in our first week. Ezra and Nehemiah are two books of the Bible, and they're two books that are put together in the Bible. They're originally one book, Ezra and Nehemiah, kind of like a part 1 and part 2. Ezra and Nehemiah track God's people going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city after God has scattered his people and allowed them to be taken captive due to their unfaithfulness to God. And so in Ezra chapter 4, they've started work in Jerusalem, and they've started building in Jerusalem. And there's some guys that oppose the work in the book of Ezra, and they write to the king, and they say, King, look, the same king that Nehemiah is serving. They say, King, look, they shouldn't be rebuilding the wall here. We got a problem. If you want to go back and look at the history book, you'll see that these people, they've caused great disturbance. And you would know that they've had renowned kings. And so go back and look at your history book and know that like this is not good if this group that you've conquered, this nation you've conquered, tries to rebuild. So King Artaxerxes, he goes back to his history book, he goes to the annals, and he realizes that's true. And so he issues a decree to stop the building. So when Nehemiah is before the king at this point, for him to say, King, I'd like to go rebuild in Jerusalem, this is a very big ask, because this king had already shut down the work once. And for him, it would mean a reversal of decision. And any leader, if you walked around any leader, especially those in kind of these sort of positions, it's hard to reverse decisions because then you look like, what were you doing? Why are you reversing your decision? And so I'm just reading between the lines, but I'm sure that all these things contribute to Nehemiah being afraid. If God's going to move us, it will mean us moving through fear. It will mean us like taking those steps when we are like scared to death to do so. It also will mean that we have to walk through the unknown. We have to move through the unknown. If God's going to move us out, we're going to like move towards what he's calling us to. It will be unknown. We look at this story and we know what happens. Nehemiah has no idea what's going to happen here, right? He has no idea where this is going, what could happen. When he knows he's about to ask the king for help. He knows he's going to ask the king to rebuild his city. But he doesn't know how the king will respond. In fact, I want you to just kind of do a thought experiment with me here to think about what Nehemiah didn't know. As he walks into the work that day, he's a cupbearer to the king. He's been just this like ordinary guy doing his job every day. And he shows up in front of the king one day and his face is distraught. And the king's like, what's wrong? And he's like, this is my opportunity. What did he not know? He didn't know if he were to say something and move at this point, he did not know if he would still have a job. All right? If you have a job, that's like never a good thing to know if you don't have a job, right? That sustains your life often. He didn't know if he'd be alive. The king could have been upset enough and just ended Nehemiah's life, undid him. He didn't know if the king would be angered or moved with favor. He had no idea how the king would respond. He had no idea if months of prayer and planning would just evaporate, per se, in an instant. Like, if all this that I'm working towards, is this the moment? Is this the time I'm supposed to act? Is this when I'm supposed to say something? I don't know. I've been praying a lot, and this is killing me, and now I'm like, I want to do something about it. And Nehemiah's got to be thinking, like, is this it? I don't know. He doesn't know if the people of Jerusalem would accept him as their leader. He didn't know if there'd be resources. He didn't know if he would have great opposition or if he'd have great favor. Those are all things Nehemiah did not know as he goes to the king. So what did Nehemiah know? The only thing I could think of was Nehemiah knew that God had gripped his heart and he had to do something. I think the only thing Nehemiah knew was somewhat the character of God and that he must do something at this point. So when God moves us out, it will often be through our fear. It will often be through the unknown. The third thing I want you to see here is that it will also be by means of our faithfulness. Kind of jumping into verse 5 and 6 next. Notice how Nehemiah speaks to the king and he says, let the king live forever. He honors the king. He acknowledges his authority. Then instead of making it political, he makes it personal. He says, why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins? Nehemiah has good repute there in the king's palace. He's done good work. He even wisely speaks to the king in this moment. He thinks about his words. There's no doubt. It reminds me of what Jesus says in Matthew 10:16 when he says, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Nehemiah's long faithfulness positioned him for a moment of favor. And so when you think about the potential of I've got this stirring in my heart and I feel like I need to move on it. Oftentimes we need to make sure in our life that we've been faithful, that we've been walking out, that for 4 months Nehemiah just kept being the cupbearer. And as we are faithful, you'll see that God's faithful. Next, I want you to see how when God moves us, it's often by means of also our planning. It could be by means of our faithfulness and our planning. God's working and Nehemiah is working. You see both things happening at the same time. As soon as the king opens the door in verse 6 that Nehemiah can go and potentially go rebuild, he asks for letters of safe passage and materials for rebuilding. And then the king asks for a timeline. One commentator put it this way, that Nehemiah combined dependent prayer with deliberate planning. dependent prayer, and deliberate planning. I think this is a place that we can often go wrong. We can jump into something that's caught our heart's attention, and we can go all in without any really ever stopping to plan. We're just like, God, you got this. And then we can go over here and we can never really consult God, and we can just go with our own way, what we think is right. It's deliberate planning and dependent prayer. And Nehemiah is ready. Like if you've got something in your heart, as I have something in my heart, and I'm like, I want to see this accomplished. I believe God is calling me to this. If I don't show up ready to have my own plans and thoughts on how this can go, then God's probably not going to show up to push me any further. There's a point where God's like, well, if you want this and I want this, where are you at? And Nehemiah is ready. And then last, I'm going to circle back to verse 4. Here's what I want you to see. How when God moves us, he does so, and I think this is most importantly, through our dependence on him. Through our dependence on him. Look back at verse 4. So I pray to the God of heaven. That's one of my favorite parts in this little episode. It is my favorite part of this episode, that we get this intimate look of how Nehemiah was just dependent on God. Like he's talking to the king. He knows the king is like, this is his chance. I'm going to say something. And as he's about to speak, he says, then I pray to the God of heaven. Like in that little moment, before he opens his mouth to the king, he's like, God, I need your help. I need to know what to say right now. Somehow there's this breath prayer that takes place where he's able to talk to God before he talks to the king. He's able to bring this before the King of Kings before he brings this to the king. God honors our dependency on him, and that's what we see from Nehemiah's story, that if we learn anything about Nehemiah, is that Nehemiah lives in dependence on God. If you want to measure spiritual maturity, one of the measures is to look at how dependent you are on God. Does your life have places and moments you can go back to where you can say, I am completely dependent on God here? If God doesn't come through, none of this works. Nehemiah was here at this point with the king, where literally, like I talked about, there's no way he can know where this is going to go. He has no idea if the king's going to honor his request. And he was saying, God, if you don't show up, this may turn out terrible. But I'm completely dependent on you. So God awakes us. Think about how he moves in us to move through us. God awakes us. He shakes us. You can't get rid of it. And then he moves us. It's like, look, we talked about it like this and when we were talking through the scripture this week. We were saying, there's a part of this where Nehemiah allows it to hit his heart. Right? He's stirred in his heart. He can't let this go. He can't believe what's happening over there. But then it goes to his mind. So his heart and head, like in his head, he's making plans. He's thinking about what I have to do. And now it's moving to his hands. There's a time for action here. That for us to worship God and to serve him means involving our heart, our head, our hands. So for Nehemiah, he is shaken by God. He's awakened by God. He's moved by God. And here's the last thing I want you to see. That is kind of the cherry on top. That God goes with us. That God awakes us, he shakes us, he moves us, and he goes with us. In verse 8, look at the end of verse 8. And the king granted me what I asked for. Why? For the good hand of my God was upon me. I want you to think for a second about what Nehemiah asked for. He said, King, I want to go rebuild my city. Oh yeah, it's the one that you shut down already. Yeah, the one you conquered. Yeah, I'd like to rebuild that. Isn't that audacious? Oh, and by the way, King, if you don't mind, can you like can I get some of your favor to make sure I can get there to do the job? And also, since you're doing that, can you just go ahead and supply us what we need to do the rebuilding with? You know, that enemy city, the one that you conquered, the one that you shut down building, is there any way you could pay for it? That's what he's asking for. And the king says, yes. And Nehemiah says, this is only because the good hand of the Lord was upon me, only because I had the favor of God, that God went with me on this. And you'll see so often when God awakes your heart and he stirs you and shakes you and moves you, that I believe he's going to go with you. That he doesn't do all that just for you to be left on your own, that God's going to go with you, just like he did with Nehemiah. You're going to see the gracious hand of God upon you. I love how Scripture echoes this truth. To Moses, who was afraid to go to Pharaoh, God said in Exodus 3:12, I will be with you. To Joshua, stepping into a daunting task, he says, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you. To the disciples who were sent to the ends of the earth, and we follow that same command that Jesus gave them, he says to them, behold, I am with you always. I believe that God never calls us to something just to abandon us there or for us to figure it out on our own. I believe that God's good hand goes with us as we go for him. One last thing about that phrase that I want us to consider today. When you think about the good hand of God being on Nehemiah and how we would want to see the good hand of God on us, here's this last thought I have for you here, that the greatest gift that we can receive is what Nehemiah received there. God's presence and favor is essentially what Nehemiah is saying, that he receives in the good hand of God being upon him. But here's the truth. On our own, we don't deserve God's good hand. The truth is that all of us have sin in our life. All of us have rebelled against God. All of us have broken God's commands. And the Bible clearly lays out that the penalty for sin is death. The penalty for us disobeying God is to be separated from God. And what the Bible tells us is that we deserve is God's hand against us, not God's hand for us. And the good news that the Scripture gives us, fast forwarding to Jesus in the New Testament, is that Jesus took that judgment that we deserve. God's wrath and his hand of judgment was placed on Jesus and not us. So that when we receive Jesus, we receive not condemnation, but we receive salvation. We receive the good hand of God when we did not deserve it. And in fact, when we deserved the hand of judgment of God. So, when you think about God waking your heart and shaking you and moving you out to go, we can know that God's good hand is with us, not because we deserve it, but because he gives that to us, that God's good hand is on us because he is good and he is loving and he has offered his hand of favor on us. I want to return, just to wrap it up, to that very first part of the story in chapter 2 where Nehemiah, when the king says to Nehemiah, why is your face looking so bad? Why are you upset? Maybe another way to say that is, what's bothering you? And like I mentioned from the beginning, I hope there's some things that bother you. If you're a believer and you're living in this world and you see all the things that aren't right, I hope there's things that bother us. I talked about this in the first week, that like we have such a heavy news cycle that we can be overwhelmed by it. And we can easily like see all the things that are wrong with the world, and we could, it's tempting just to say like, well, I can't do anything. But there's always like one thing that God's going to keep just putting on our heart. I really think that. I think every believer, God's just going to keep putting one thing. It could be super, super simple. And sometimes it's much more profound. It depends on the situation and season, but in every season, it seems like God starts to stir in your heart something that should be different than what it is, and he calls believers out to do it. He moves people out, even through our fear, even through the unknown, but through our faithfulness and through his faithfulness, God moves us out. So what's bothering you? What's in your heart? Do you have something? I'll let you think about that for a second, because I want to end in a time of prayer. If you feel like maybe God's moving in your heart in some way, that I want to pray for you today. Just to give you an example from my life of how this happened, I got to witness this from my wife, and it's a cool story. I always like to share because it really was the good hand of God on the work. And so a lot of you guys know this. We were foster parents for a long time, and after we were done as foster parents, we were like, how else can we help people who are working in foster care? Because we love that work. We love how it's helping kids and families. And so we found ourselves supporting a lot of families that were also doing foster care. And there was one such family that was fostering a little girl for a long time. She'd been in their home, and she had experienced healing, and it was such a good situation for her. And so she's with this family. Things are going great. But then second cousins, third overs, aunt's sister shows up. And I'm just telling you, it really was something like that. And they're like, hey, we'd like the child now. And so this goes to the court, and the judge says, well, by the law, I have to give the child to this very distant relative. And the judge says, essentially, I would do this differently if I could, but this is how the law reads. If the law said different, I would do it. And it was a heartbreaking experience across the board. There's a lot more dynamics even to what I'm explaining, just to be fair to the situation, to where you would feel like it was a very large injustice done. So, my wife, Jennifer, she was there in the courtroom when this happened. She hears the judge, and she's like, well, I'm going to go make a law then. And she got her heart stirred and awakened to this problem she saw. We had been working in foster care. What else can we do to help? And she's like, why not change the law? And so she's like, it takes a little time. We talked to one of the state senators. Somehow we got a meeting with one of their staffers or something like that a few weeks later. Then some months passed. We had a lot of stuff going on in our life, but she couldn't shake it. Very, very similar to this story. And then she lines up an opportunity to meet with one of our state senators. We sit down in his office and we explain the situation, what we'd like to see happen. And he's like, let's do it. We're like, oh, wow, okay, is this how this works? He's like, yeah, I'll draft something today. And we're like, okay, sure. And then he drafts it, and a couple weeks later, it's being worked on, and it's next thing you know, it's passing in the House and the Senate, and then they're like, here's the law. We're like, we just passed the law. This is crazy. And it was a great law to get passed. It's helped lots of foster parents. It's in our eyes very good and very helpful, and one small thing that is helping that area, because God moved in her heart, and she moved with it. Now, since that time, she's helped pass 2 or 3 other laws. That's kind of some of the work that she's doing right now. And there's one thing we learned really quick from that whole experience, that law that really needed to be passed, it doesn't happen like that. You don't show up in a state senator's office, and then he said, let's draft it, and then a few weeks later, it's on the floor, and a few weeks later, it's voted through. In fact, I don't think I've ever heard of anything like that happening unless it just has huge public support and there's huge public outcry. It was just totally unusual, especially since laws like that are not on like high priority for those people working there, unfortunately. Okay, I'm getting off track here. But the point was that when we saw what happened, it was like this was the good hand of God upon us. This was not something that we did. She takes no credit for it, but it was like the good hand of God was on us. And I was just faithful to what like God called me to do. So, again, this could be really small. It could be profound. It could be a law change. It could be helping set up a new nonprofit. It could be just something in your family that needs to change. It could be anything. Do you have something in your heart that God's stirring? And could it be that he's asking you to move on it?